Disrupting Japan, Episode 86. Disrupting Japan is sponsored by Wovn Case. If you've ever tried to hire staff in Japan, you know how crazy it can be. I mean, there are over 3,000 recruiting firms here, and they're all telling you pretty much the same thing. Well, the guys at Wovn Case are different. When you're coming into Japan, they'll sit down and work out a long-term hiring strategy with you. Is it best to start with a country manager, or perhaps a head of partner sales? Maybe the first step is really a community manager. Now, I've known the team at Wovn Case for a long time, and they've worked with a lot of the companies that have been on this show and with some of the world's biggest brands as well. So if you're hiring in Japan, you really should talk to Wovn Case. Welcome to Disrupting Japan, straight talk from Japan's most successful entrepreneurs. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to talk about something that you and I, and probably everyone else listening right now, has struggled with: translation and localization. It's been an industry that has both seen some impressive innovations over the past decade, but is also somehow quite resistant to change. Localization is a part of business that almost every firm has to deal with, but almost no one looks forward to. It's a lot like dealing with lawyers in that way, I suppose. Well, today we sit down with Jeff Sandford, co-founder of Wovn, who say they've developed a one-line-of-code method for taking the pain out of localization and translation. We talk a bit about the mechanics of website localization and the state of the industry as a whole, of course. We also talk about the important and surprising differences between what makes great UI/UX with Japanese and Western users, and what kind of tasks machine translation can really be trusted with. And Jeff shares the story of what made him decide to start a company with a co-founder who he'd never even met before. But you know, Jeff tells that story much better than I can. So let's hear from our sponsor and get right to the interview. Kotowork is doing something pretty cool. It's a community of Japanese language students who want to work at Japanese companies with global ambitions. Kotowork also trains them in business culture, Japanese hospitality, and a bit of global marketing. And since it's a real community, Kotowork is always there for both candidates and companies to solve cultural misunderstandings and the hundreds of other little problems that can come up when foreigners work for a Japanese company. Kotowork has a wonderful, long-term, community-based approach to making sure everything runs smoothly, and you should really check them out at kotowork.jp. Cheers. So I'm sitting with Jeff Sandford, the co-founder of Minimal Technologies and the creator of Wovn, and thanks for sitting down with me today.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Wovn at a high level is simply localization for a website, but it's more than that. It's more interesting than that. So why don't you tell us a bit about what it is?
So often people, when you tell them you do website localization, they think translation, which it actually isn't. Translation is a very integral part of it, but what we focus on is the system of localizing a website. So let's say you have an English website and you have to create a Chinese version or Spanish version of that website. We handle all of the details of actually creating those versions and also managing them and serving them to your users.
Now, there's a lot of companies that are doing that, but you guys have a particularly interesting approach to it. Mm-hmm. The Wovn promise, as it were, is the ultimate in simplicity, right? It's a single line of code copied into your web page.
Exactly, yeah. In the simplest case, you can really take a website, even a relatively large website, and have the entire thing translated within minutes. That's the promise. That's the goal, right?
Okay. So you get a little piece of JavaScript code. You sign up at Wovn, you get your API key. You put that code in your website, mm-hmm. and suddenly the whole website is Wovn enabled.
Yes, that's it.
And how do you localize it? How do you translate? How do you actually get the Chinese and the Japanese onto the page?
Okay. So the next step is actually creating those translations and putting them in place. So what a lot of people do, especially larger websites, or people who have websites that constantly change, is they'll use our automatic translation features and automatic page creation features. So you turn those on, and we will automatically add all the pages on your website. We'll automatically translate all of your content and publish it for users to see. Now, if you don't want to do it automatically, you can also have all the pages added for you and then go in and translate everything yourself. A very common use case is to do the automated translation and then go back and edit and modify and improve it yourself.
Well, that would make a lot of sense. But actually, tell me a bit about the use cases. Tell me about your customers. Who's using Wovn?
A lot of our customers tend to be surprisingly e-commerce websites and larger websites here in Japan. Surprisingly enough, Japanese companies haven't quite gotten on board with localization yet on their websites. And specifically, the Tokyo Olympics, which is coming up, has really lit a fire under them to start working on this.
Well, e-commerce makes sense because that way, I mean, someone puts up a new product, it's automatically translated into 2 or 3 additional languages, and they can go back and refine that later.
Exactly, and you can see right then the cost benefit of it as well.
Right. And so, who else? Is it like travel industry sites, or is it
That's another one. Travel industry, tourism in general, and then also restaurants and things that they have a lot of foot traffic from tourists and things like that is also pretty common. Hotels is another one. And
about how many clients do you have now? How many sites are being translated, being localized using Wovn.io?
All right, so this changes all the time, but I think right now
hopefully it's going up. I mean,
it is going up. I think currently it's about 8,000.
All right.
So yeah, 8,000 websites.
Okay, and of those 8,000 sites, how many are paying and how many are on the free tier?
Good question. So right now the paid ones are definitely the smaller side of it.
Oh, they always are.
Definitely. Is that most of our paid users are Japanese right now.
I want to dig down into that a little bit later.
Sure.
And talk about your overall sales and marketing strategy. But before we do, let me back up a bit and let's talk a bit about you.
Sure.
You co-founded this company in 2014 with Hayashi-san.
Yes.
Well, let's back up a bit. What brought you to Japan the first time?
Good question. This is the question you always get as a foreigner living in Japan.
It's obligatory.
Initially, I just really wanted the experience to live outside of my home country. I had a degree, a computer science degree, so I could have been a developer, but I had this fear that if I had jumped into a career in English, I would never learn Japanese. I didn't want to get stuck in an English bubble, which is a lot of people do here. And I think
it's easy to do here.
So, especially with the internet these days, it's so easy to just live in your own world, but in Japan. Because of that, I decided to do something I knew I wouldn't really enjoy that much, to force myself to learn Japanese so I could work at a company, in a Japanese company, or a company where I'd speak Japanese. So I started off being an English teacher. Okay. I did it for about 2.5 years. Had enough of that.
Yeah, that's 2 years is a pretty... Yeah.
I didn't...
It's a tough job.
I don't hate it, but it's definitely not what is going to be my career, and I knew it from the beginning, so I wanted to move forward. But definitely, I think teaching is much more difficult than people give it credit for.
It's a tough job.
I had always done some freelance web development and things. So after that, I had continued and kind of went full-time. And I lived in Japan for a little bit doing freelance web development, actually. And then I had some weddings back in the States. So I went back for some weddings, actually. And when I was back in the States for that, that's when I got connected with Takaharu Hayashi. We actually had a few Skype meetings and decided over Skype, let's do it. One of my good friends here, a guy from New Zealand, is the one who said, "Hey Jeff, there's this guy who's looking to co-found with somebody. He's looking for somebody who speaks English or someone who's foreign, has experience globally. So what do you think?" So that's how I got connected with them. Yep. We decided to do it before even seeing each other. We decided over Skype. I came back to Japan with the plan to co-found with this person I'd never even met in person.
Okay, and the company you two have built, it is a very multinational team, right?
Yes,
Usually when I see startups in Japan that have a really good multicultural team to them, it's usually foreign engineers and Japanese support and sales. And is that kind of how it's worked out for you guys?
It is similar, actually, yeah. Well, we do have one of our, actually the first person who joined the company after me and Takaharu, he's actually Taiwanese, but he lived in Australia as well. He speaks Chinese, Japanese, and English fluently. So he's definitely one of the cornerstones of our company. So he works on the business side, of course. He does he does customer service. And he really owns that part and manages it all. And then on the development side, what we've done is we try to go half and half. I feel like if you're based in Japan, you should you should also be employing Japanese people as well, but also because we want to have that global community. And I think that's part of the reason it's like this. It's very much half and half English-Japanese. So when we communicate with writing, which we use a message system, it's mostly English. If there's a really important message, I'll put it in Japanese as well, even though our Japanese developers can read English. But when we have meetings, it's really half and half. People speak, if they're Japanese, speak Japanese, and then I translate to English. If they speak English, then I translate to Japanese, and it's back and forth. Sometimes I feel like it'd be nice if everyone spoke the same language, but I think it's actually really great, especially given what we're working on too. So we have 2 French developers who speak French together. We have 2 Vietnamese people joining us soon. I'm sure they'll speak Vietnamese together. So we have, and the Japanese people speak Japanese together, and then I speak English with the Canadian developer. Right. So it's very interesting. It's a very small, international community. And for people who are looking for that experience, who really want to work in other languages, especially who want to study English or Japanese, I think it's a great opportunity.
All of the 4 companies I founded here in Japan, and also the U.S. company I brought into Japan, in every single case, the spoken communication throughout the company was in Japanese. Mm-hmm. The written communication was in English.
Well, Japanese people, they can read and write English pretty well.
Well, that's it, yeah. All educated Japanese can read English.
Yes,
right?
Yes, they can all read it for sure. Yeah.
And Japanese is a really hard language to write.
Maybe I'm just going on and on, but one other interesting thing actually about, I think, the product side of our company is the design of our product really isn't very Japanese, for lack of a better word. I find a lot of Japanese websites, in general, Japanese websites don't follow that minimalist design, which is really important to us. That's why we're called Minimal Technologies.
Well, that is true. Japanese graphic design in general is much, much more cluttered than Western design.
I agree, but I also think that there's much more of an influence from the business side in Japan than there's other places. I think they give the design side a little bit more freedom in the West than they do here. In my experience, I'm sure this is the same anywhere, but the business side really wants to just pack in the information, which is interesting because Japanese people, they like the information, but Westerners don't like the information. They want less.
So you feel in Japan there's like the approval committee gets the design and say, oh, well, we need to include these 12 more points. Yeah,
actually, interesting thing was we had a landing page just specifically for Japanese business people who would possibly use our website. And it was in Japanese. And I wouldn't allow it in English, to be honest, because it was very cluttered and it didn't look minimal to me. Mm. And it's the kind of design that you see it's very common in pamphlets and things for businesses here. But it's not the kind that you could really put in English and give people a good impression of your company, because it packs in a lot of information, but I think to Westerners it's too much information. We like getting just the bare minimum. And there's places for having a lot of information, but I feel like they really like it at the top of the page, above the fold.
You guys are using all the modern tools, so you're measuring what converts and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And do the busy pages convert better in Japanese than the minimalist pages?
Yeah, that's actually a difficult problem because people want to have more in Japanese than they do in English. So I would say going from Japanese to English is much easier because it's very easy to remove something when you're localizing, but it's much more difficult to add something because that might involve new styling or new... you might have to rearrange the content in that case in order to handle the extra information, right?
And this gets really to kind of the core of localization and translation are different but related things.
Yes.
Well, actually, let's take it step by step. So we were talking about the different sensibilities in design. Mm-hmm. With the exception of some e-commerce companies, but most companies won't change the design much for each individual market. They go with a global design.
Yes.
So the next step is the actual language. Is machine translation good enough? Should people really feel okay about putting up their website and their information about their company and their philosophy and having it machine translated into Japanese and Chinese?
It really depends, first of all, on the language pair. If you're translating between English and Japanese, that's one very heavily supported pair, but at the same time, these two languages are very difficult to translate between, so it's not as good as it would be if it were English-French, for example. Our French developers actually help us translating the website into French, and he translated the settings page recently and said, well, I only had to fix like 1 or 2 things because it was all fine. So when it comes to shorter, succinct, self-contained sentences and things that don't have context that related to previously said things and stuff like that, it's pretty good. And also I'll add that with Google's new neural machine translations, we use the neural net to translate. It's actually really good. It's actually a huge leap is from the regular one to the neural one. So
after that, you've got a kind of step up. You connect with Gengo,
yes,
which is a SaaS-based spot translation company here in Tokyo.
Right.
So do most of your customers take advantage of the human translation that Gengo provides, or do they kind of outsource it to their own people, or do they just let Google handle it?
Not as many people use those as I'd like them to, because I think the standard for English or for translations here is a little bit lower than maybe, for example, if you're in Europe, because they don't read it as well. There's not as many people who speak English here, so the standard's just a little bit lower. Companies who care use it. They'll use Gengo, or the ones who really care the most do it themselves. Gengo is a great service, and it really does. The translations are really good. I've never seen a translation from Gengo that seemed like I couldn't read or couldn't understand. It's always good. But if you really want to, especially with marketing things and like taglines, those kind of things, it's not even related to the quality of the translation. You need someone you can talk to and explain the meaning behind what you want to translate and the nuances, which is really important when you're doing marketing material and things that are a little bit more sales and things like that. Yeah.
I guess your customers kind of triage
yes.
their translation. So some that are maybe technical specs or raw data, they'll let the translation engine handle by itself.
Yep.
Some more general informational things they'll outsource to Gengo, and then things that are really advertising copy or headlines or critical
yes.
things they'll handle themselves.
Yes, and I can tell you from experience, at least with us, advertising copy changes completely, like even a different meaning. For us, if you look at the English one and the Japanese one, the meanings are just different. I don't even try to match them, because you really want to express the feeling more than the meaning, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to really have someone that works with you to do those.
But even then, when you're looking at doing business internationally, translation's only the first step. So even
yes.
if you've got the website translated, you've got email to send back and forth, you've
yes.
got people asking you questions in English or Chinese that you have to answer now.
Yes. Yeah.
And how do your customers handle that? Like what stage are they at? Are they using Wovn.io to kind of fill out the website where they already have the infrastructure behind it to handle the different languages? Mm-hmm. Or are they sort of using Wovn.io as like the first step because it's so easy, and then suddenly discovering we have to answer these customers?
That does happen, actually. I think it really depends on the users, but a lot of users end up just kind of figuring it out as they go. So they'll do it, and then they get these, like you said, emails from people, and they have to figure out, okay, so now how do we handle this? They find a service or whatever. That's something that we want to handle ourselves. And we have plans for everything you just mentioned. We have plans for emails. We have plans for support, multilingual support as well. We really want to make it so, because localization, like you said before, isn't just translation. It's a whole system of things, right? So we want to provide the whole solution for you. You can just plug it in and you're good to go. So that includes, like you said, the support and multilingual support and the emails.
Are you going to be rolling out new products in the next couple of months for something like that? Anything you can share?
Yes. So right now we're really focusing on is scaling, because I'm sure, as everyone knows, that is a huge issue for people to deal with. And as your user base grows, you have to be able to support it. So as soon as we finish our current project, our next projects are actually what we were just talking about. So email and multilingual support. I'd like to have some of this stuff out by the end of the year, hopefully more than one or two. But of course, we don't have any solid hard deadlines right now that I can give you, but those are things that are really just coming right down the pipeline. They're on their way.
Awesome. Let's dive down a bit into some of the more kind of technical problems involved with this. The way Wovn.io works is it's a cloud-based service, right? Yes. So when a request comes in to serve a page, that request is partially routed through Wovn servers who figure out which translations need to be inserted, and then they serve that page, right?
So it depends what you're using. So we actually have two main services. We have the snippet we talked about before. We have another one which is a library you install on your server. And that's the one that When you get the request, it gets the data from the Wovn server and then returns it to the user that way through Wovn and through the servers as well. The snippet is a little bit different in that the user downloads the page and then the JavaScript itself will download the translations for the page. We use a really good fast CDN. So basically when you're downloading the translation information, it's cached and it's very close to the user. Sometimes you don't even see it. If someone's trying to translate to Japanese from English to Japanese, for example, they might not even see it. It just shows up in Japanese from the beginning.
So there's really no impact on the latency. This doesn't significantly increase the page load time at all?
It doesn't significantly increase. The JavaScript one has absolutely no effect. The other library one has a very, very small effect.
Okay. Well, that's important because, page load speed these days is directly related to search rankings.
It is, yes. SEO is very important, especially if you're trying to sell things. Yep.
Well, SEO, again, though, it's how do you deal with the fact that if it's a JavaScript that is determining the language and dynamically substituting the appropriate language, how do you make sure that the pages in each specific language are indexed correctly by the search engines?
Good question. So that's the main weakness of the snippet. So it's really easy to do, but the SEO isn't as good. So Google says that they will process JavaScript. We've worked on it. We've never been able to reliably get them to use our snippet to translate all the pages. That is the reason that we have the library as well. So in that case, the search engines are seeing the translated pages. So in that case, your SEO is great.
Okay, so would it work with, for example, WordPress? So, I've been thinking of getting Disrupting Japan content translated into Japanese for forever.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure. So, actually, it's funny, we're looking at it today at the office and at your website, everyone's saying, oh, they should use Wovn.io.
Well, let's talk about it. Does it work with WordPress?
It does, yeah. That's actually, of course, one of the most common ones. So I would really love to have a WordPress plugin, which we don't have yet. But you can also use it, the PHP library. It's kind of what we tried to do is get as far outside of the application as possible.
Well, let me put it this way: do I have to write code?
No.
Okay. That's the important.
There is some configuration to made, of course, anytime you install a library on your server. But besides the configuration, you should not have to write any code.
Let's move for a minute over to the sales and marketing side. At a high level, is your strategy more bottom up or top down? So, bottom up is evangelizing engineers and getting the developers excited about it, and top down is more going to the enterprises and saying, hey, this will save you X amount of dollars and make you deliver the project faster. What's your basic approach to marketing this?
I feel like we've tried both, but right now it's really top down is what's working the most.
Really? That surprises me.
Me as well. I think when we first launched, we expected it to be used by bloggers or people who have small personal websites, and we were really surprised to find all these corporate clients who wanted to use our service, and we actually had to pivot. And that was a rough time, let me tell you, in the development side, pivoting, because supporting a website that has thousands of pages and a website that has 100 pages is a completely different job. So the corporate websites, specifically I think in Japan, is such a big part of the market for us.
Well, they certainly pay better.
But yeah, well, there's really a need for it in Japan right now.
Well, what kind of things did you have to change to service the enterprise market? Were there specific features? Was it just different types of... Did you have to hire more sales engineers versus developers?
One of the main things that we worked on a lot was the automatic page creation, automatic translation, because when you have such a large website, you just can't do it all by hand. So you really need these tools to help you do it automatically, which really fit into our what we want to create as a product. So that worked out well for us. But when we're creating a system and expecting to serve 100 websites with 10 pages, it's different than serving 10 websites with thousands of pages. So we specifically had one website, e-commerce website, who joined us pretty early on, who's still with us. I think they have 40,000 pages now. Initially, we weren't planning on supporting that much, especially not from the gate. So.
That sounds like an almost ideal situation. It's forcing you to address the scalability problems before they get too bad, right?
Yes, and that is... we thought that the entire time, but it didn't always feel like it.
Looking back,
this is great, but it's terrible at the same time. And that also taught me a very valuable lesson, which is to scale beforehand. So that's why we're doing scaling now, before we get to the point where we have to scramble and have some sleepless months, should I say? Not nights, but months.
You mentioned that Wovn.io is looking to do more business globally.
Yes.
So for the global expansion, are you planning on following that same kind of top-down enterprise strategy, or are you going to try to do more grassroots, bottom-up, convert the developer strategy worldwide?
I have a feeling that the bottom-up is going to work better, but we're going to go with whatever works best. So we're going to try a little bit of each and see which one picks up and really adapt. One thing that we learned from when we first launched and realized we were completely wrong about our market is that you really can't make assumptions. So we're going to go in with an open mind and try everything, I think. But once we figure out what's going to work best for us, we'll focus on it and really try to work on that until we find success.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and actually, there's a lot more competition globally as well. So that's going to affect our approach. So one example of how we've worked on that in Japan is we have a Wovn Partners program, which is if you are a web development company who develops other websites, then you can join the Wovn Partners program and sell Wovn to your clients.
So what's the advantage for the partners? Is it just discounts on the services? Is it
really the main thing the partners get is the system.
And the partnership program, it gives them tools to manage like multiple websites and things like that.
It gives them tools to manage multiple websites. They can also a little bit customize Wovn.io to appear more like a service they're offering. Those are the main benefits.
All right. Let me ask you some general Japan questions.
Sure.
So we talked before that Wovn has a really multicultural, multinational team. This is something I see more and more Japanese startups who say they want to do that. They want to cultivate a international team.
Right.
What do you see as both the advantages and disadvantages on a very practical level of having a multicultural team?
I think that Japan, and I'm going to make some very general statements here, so forgive me. As a country, a lot of times they just need to get out of their own way. They're very good at what they do, of course. I mean, Japan's been very successful in many places, but by including people from different countries into your company is, I think it really can't be measured in terms of how valuable it is, because when you want to have those startup ideals, I've seen it happen at our own company, and I think we do a really good job at it, but not even intending to, you kind of pull towards where you're from, where you grew up. It's not even conscious, I don't think even. And having those other people on the team, just having those people there and them speaking up and speaking their mind is critical to creating a healthy, thriving startup community in Japan, I think, because Japan historically and even now doesn't really have a thriving startup scene. And I think one of the reasons is because the thinking of startups, the whole concept of startups, really doesn't really fit with traditional Japanese thinking.
Well, I think that there are a very large number of foreigners involved in the startup scene here in Japan.
Yes.
Much greater than the general population.
Yes, definitely.
And that's true in San Francisco as well. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing with the mixed team, getting down to really specific, so some of the companies I've run, I've been the only non-Japanese. Mm-hmm. And I'm very aware of the negatives and the inefficiencies that involves. Mm-hmm. And my Japanese is pretty good, but it's not native.
Right.
And, it takes me 5 times as long to read something in Japanese as it does anyone else in the company.
You're preaching to me, I know.
So I guess so when you can look at the real specific negatives, what are the really specific positives and advantages rather than just general concepts about multiculturalism?
Okay, I'll give you a specific example. Our marketing director, his girlfriend, he's Japanese. He's born in Japan. He's Japanese. His girlfriend is actually American, and the product, in a lot of ways, has been something that I've nurtured and created a lot. compared to a lot of other products in Japan, it doesn't really follow this. I don't think it's very Japanese, for lack of a better word. And we often have problems with specifically maybe older gentlemen, businessmen who just really don't know how to use our product. We've put in tutorials and stuff to try to help with that, but they want a manual. They want someone to explain it to them.
Oh yeah,
right. And he said he had his girlfriend use it, and she had no problem. She just started like, oh, this is fine. Oh, she kind of figured it out as you go, which is much more of a Western approach, I think, just kind of figure it out as you go. And that was something that was really helpful to me to convince other people that we're doing the right thing as far as creating this minimalist approach and creating the product that we have. He was surprised as well to see his girlfriend's reaction. I think he also used it on one of her friends, and she had the same thing. For her, it was no problem to use.
Okay, that makes sense. Certainly, if you're looking for eventually going global, you're going to need that input from day one.
Right.
But actually, I have found that as well. Western users, both business users and developers, are much more willing to jump into something and kind of take it step by step. Japanese users want to sort of know the whole path forward before taking that first step.
Yeah.
Well, over the last 10 years, over the last 5 years especially, we've seen more and more foreign developers, foreign engineers in Japan. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's really beneficial to the startup ecosystem here and to the enterprise ecosystem for that matter.
Yes.
But what would your advice be to a foreign engineer who's thinking of coming to Japan to work for a startup?
Prepare yourself, because I don't mean to be very negative about it, but it's just the fact is that Japanese culture is so different from Western culture. I think Japanese culture is, maybe Korean might be close, but as far as a culture that is so different from Western culture, I think Chinese culture is maybe closer to Western than Japanese is. Japanese, to me, really is on the far end. When you first come here, I'd say the first year is like a honeymoon period where everything's, everything's new, this is cool. And then after that, it can become very kind of gray and depressing. So
people go through the cycles, right?
Yes.
So the first 9 months a year, it's wonderful, everything's interesting. Yeah. The next 9 months, it's sort of like, I hate this place, I want to go home.
Yeah.
And then it kind of stabilizes.
So I would say that the one thing I always tell people, even also when I speak with people who are in interviews, I ask them, I want to gauge if they're going to be able to make it here, because some people come here and they leave in 6 months because they can't take it. Have some kind of support system. So you need somebody here who is from your country, or at least, or who's not Japanese, who you can hang out with and chill with and complain to, or whatever you need, because without it, it can get really lonely here. I was just back in the States for 2 weeks, and I had this happen to me before, but when I first go back to the States, I'm always surprised that people start talking to me. I don't know them. I'm like, oh, hello, good morning to you too.
Yes, we Americans are a very friendly bunch.
Yes, I think more so than others maybe.
Yeah, we are.
It takes a second for me to get into it, but once I get into it, I'm like, I like this. I like being able to talk and be friendly with people, even if I don't know you. In Tokyo is kind of like the worst of Japan in that way, whereas no one's going to talk to you if they don't know you, right?
You said a number of times it's important to kind of prepare yourself. So what are you preparing yourself for exactly? I mean, how do you prepare yourself?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people look at Japan and have a very different image of the reality, because I think the way that the West looks at Japan is not realistic. They see it as kind of, people often say, this land of technology and anime and crazy weird things that everywhere you go is weird, but
that is here.
It is, but it's not to the extent that people expect it to be. So
you have to go look for it.
Right.
Yeah, you have to seek it out.
Right. So when I say prepare yourself, I really mean to set your expectations, that this isn't going to be what you've watched on anime, or even, if you watch dramas or whatever, it's not the same as that either. So just be honest with yourself about what you're getting into, and don't expect it to be like a theme park.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, from my own experience, I've noticed that the Westerners who come to Japan expecting Japan to be a certain way, either whether it's from anime or martial arts or the more traditional arts, those guys usually don't last very long.
No.
They usually go home after 3 or 4 years.
I mean, it's a very different culture from where you're from, but it's a modern culture. One of the greatest things I found about living here is learning about this, more than the differences, the similarities. What do all humans share,
That's an important insight for business and startups as well, is that it's easy to talk about the differences.
Yes.
But in building a business, it's the similarities that are most important.
Definitely.
Because that's what's going to translate from Japan to the US market or to Australia or to China or wherever your next step is.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, listen, before we wrap up, I want to ask you what I call my magic wand question. And that is, if I gave you a magic wand and I said you could change one thing about Japan, anything at all, you could change the education system, the way people think about risk, anything at all to make it better for startups in Japan, what would you change?
I would say if I had a magic wand, I would change people's willingness to be uncomfortable, which is, I think, common anywhere. They don't want to be uncomfortable, but specifically, they're willing to be afraid, willing to do something that you aren't sure the outcome and something that you're not used to doing. So,
but let's dig into that a minute, because uncomfortable, I mean, I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
To grow as a person, you need to push yourself into doing things that are uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say Japanese society on one level is very comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you will.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of gaman,
yes,
and endurance and putting up with things.
Right. And working on something until you're great at it, just keep on
Right.
killing yourself every day.
So that's actually, Japan is probably better than anywhere at that. So that's clearly that's clearly not what you're homing in on. So
right.
We're talking about being uncomfortable. What do you mean exactly?
And I guess I'm thinking more about users and clients, not so much inside the company, which when we want to do something different than they're used to doing, it's not considered.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's not necessarily that it's risky or dangerous.
Right.
It's just this feeling that we've never walked down this path
I'm not
before.
used to this. I don't want to do this. You walk down the street, and if there's construction, there's about 4 or 5 people waving you around the construction. I saw 3 people yesterday. Just there's no foot traffic even near them, and I think that's Japan's downfall right there.
Well, yeah, there'll be like one guy swinging a pick and like 3 guys directing traffic.
I think any other country maybe they wouldn't be there because you'd be expected to figure it out, and I think in the States you're just expected to figure stuff out a lot more here, and that's what I mean by uncomfortable. Where here you're guided through everything. I feel like comparatively, especially as a customer, if you're a customer somewhere, you're guided through the whole process, even sitting down at a table at a restaurant.
That's true. I mean, and I think that attitude kind of bubbles up even to corporate culture.
Yes.
So in corporate decision making, I mean, if you're trying to sell something to a large enterprise customer, that sense of guiding the decision is very much. The section chief will not look at the data, look at the costs and make a decision. He'll kick it down to his subordinates who will work together and provide that guidance and bring everyone on board and then present it to the chief who will then make that decision.
Right, yeah. That's basically what I'm talking about. I think that probably is the thing that I think it leads to a lot of inefficiency, I think.
I think so as well. I mean, it leads to inefficiencies. It leads to stagnation, a lack of innovation. Innovation, by definition, is not necessarily going out of your comfort zone, but, well, maybe a little bit out of your comfort zone because you're trying something new.
Yeah.
They just need a few more people, a few more startups, pushing that envelope, pushing that comfort level just a little bit.
Right.
Yep. And great things will happen.
Yeah. And what I see a lot is on an individual level, I don't see that as much of a problem, but when it gets to organizations and groups, it becomes more and more of a problem here. Which I'm sure is the same anywhere, I guess. But,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's like, I think in general, most people are wonderful one-on-one. When you get them in big groups, that's when problems happen.
I think also we've done a really great job of building a team. Our Japanese developers specifically, I mean, all of our developers are great, but Japanese developers, I don't think are very typical Japanese developers because I don't think it's very typical to want to work for a startup here. You want to work for a larger company usually.
There must be a lot of Japanese developers who are attracted to that situation.
Definitely, yeah. So that's what we found. And this comes back to the uncomfortable thing. I think developers in general, they want the kind of environment we've built, which is to just be left alone to do their work, to not have to go through levels just to do something. So I think it's really something that any developer would want to work in, but uncomfortable to be in this not just something that is new for work, but your whole life. This is the whole way that everything's organized here. It's not normal.
Right, right. Trying something new, pushing yourself a little bit further.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Hey, listen, Jeff, thanks so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's a great time.
Your journey to success in Japan will involve some twists and turns. In trying to navigate new terrain, planning the safest, most effective way through on your own can be overwhelming. The Carter Group have been using market intelligence and research to guide Japan entrants for decades. They've honed an agile, cost-effective, but consultative approach that will help you find the perfect product-market fit, explore user and consumer dynamics, and act as an honest broker to let you know the reputation and track record of potential partners here in Japan. And when you're ready to go, their executive search team can also help you hire the right people to drive your business forward. So if you haven't got Japan completely figured out yet, the Carter Group can help you out. And we're back. I really like Jeff's point that to make progress, Japanese founders and innovators, or anyone else really, needs to become more comfortable with being uncomfortable. Throughout Japanese business culture, there is an overwhelming need for certainty and for guidance, and in most large companies, that fear of uncertainty is crippling them. But even on a personal level, I've always believed that the quality of one's life is directly proportional to the amount of uncertainty that you can put up with. And Wovn.io seems to have the right attitude towards the uncertainty they are facing in their international expansion. Their paid user growth in Japan has been driven primarily by relationships with and direct sales to enterprise customers. It's a top-down model that will be hard to replicate overseas, at least on a startup's budget. An enterprise sales force is expensive, so Wovn.io will most likely need to develop a bottom-up grassroots campaign to get developers and designers on board, and then convince their managers that Wovn is the right tool. I also found it interesting that Wovn.io is planning on filling other niches in the localization ecosystem, such as email and help desk support. It's a lot of functionality for a relatively small startup to go after, but the market need is huge, and no one company is dominating the market right now. So it's going to be exciting to watch how all these uncertainties play out over the next 5 years. If you've got an opinion or a story about localization or translation, Jeff and I would love to hear from you. So come by disruptingjapan.com/show086 and tell us about it. And when you come by the site, you'll see all the links and notes that Jeff and I talked about and much, much more in the resources section of the post. Oh, and before we go, I want to tell you a bit about our sponsors. No, don't worry. We're done with the ads for today, I promise. But over the past few months, I've had a number of people comment that I seem a little too enthusiastic in my praise for our sponsors. Now, of course, their sponsorship is what allows me to introduce you to all these amazing companies and founders. But more than that, every one of our sponsors really does contribute to the community here. And yes, I've turned down a couple companies that I didn't feel were a perfect fit. So hey, check out our sponsors, drop by their sites, and let them know you heard about them here. But most of all, thanks for listening. And thank you for letting people interested in Japanese startups know about the show. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for listening to Disrupting Japan. Disrupting Japan is a proud member of the Japan Podcast Network. It's a community of some of the best audio content about Japan. So if you're looking for other high-quality podcasts about Japan, check out the other shows in the Japan Podcast Network.